We're going to switch subjects in a big way now. We're going to talk about the #1 freedom issue for me and this show. I'm talking about freedom of speech and the right to say what we want and think what we want without the government harassing us. Since 1977, it has been against the Canadian Human Rights Act in Canada to publish anything, quote, likely to promote hatred or contempt, unquote. In the past 10 years, that law has been applied to the internet with brutal consequences. More than 30 Canadians are now subject to lifetime speech bans, ordered not to say or write certain things on pain of prison. The very first person convicted under this law, a senior citizen named John Taylor, actually served jail time when he wouldn't turn off his telephone answering machine message that had some bad words on it. In other words, the counterfeit right not to be offended has destroyed the real human right to free speech. But in 2009, someone actually beat the system. For the first time in 32 years under this law, someone charged with hate speech was acquitted, and the censorship law itself declared unconstitutional. Of course, the Human Rights Commission is appealing that loss. But for the next two segments, we're going to talk with the man accused of being a webmaster for a website that has published hate speech. Marc Lemire fought back and became the first Canadian to be acquitted of this thought crime. So far, at least, he joins us now in the studio. Welcome, Marc.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Well, I want to start with who you are, because you have been called a neo-Nazi, you've been called a racist, you've been called a member of the Heritage Front by your accusers, and this has been the center of the hearings against you. Are these accurate accusations, and how would you describe yourself?
No, they're not accurate accusations. I am a person who deals in computers, and that's where my career is, and I was a former medic in the Canadian Armed Forces. The accusations that they're using against me, they didn't use any specifics in any of my cases. They tried to just simply throw up that I'm a neo-Nazi. They called no evidence on it. All the evidence that they called was material that was on my website on an internet message board where people could post comments and things like that.
Well, let's talk about that. Which website are you referring to?
My website's called the Freedom Site.
The Freedom Site. What was your relationship with a group called the Heritage Front?
The Heritage Front was active back in the 90s, and I was a young kid at the time. I had some interest in some of the things that they were doing, in particularly things like opposition to employment equity, things like reducing immigration. So I listened to some of what they were about and went away from it. I mean, I was involved with them peripherally in my teenage years.
Do you still, now they're widely regarded as a racist group. Are you a racist?
No, absolutely not.
You wouldn't categorize yourself as a white pride activist or anything of that sort?
No.
You wouldn't, okay.
Oh, I would classify myself as a human rights activist, because what I do now is look and study everything about the Canadian Human Rights Act, the Canadian Human Rights Commission, what they've done, and what censors do in generally, and that's the focus of what I've done for the last 10 or 15 years.
Now that's what you've done since you were caught in the censorship
even
trap.
before I was caught.
All right. And I want to ask you one more question, because my studies about the Heritage Front show that it was a racist organization, but it was led for a while by a man named Grant Bristow, who was later revealed to be a Canadian government contractor, someone who worked for CSIS. Did you have any dealings with Grant Bristow?
I had met him a couple of times.
Was he the boss of the Heritage Front when you...
He was the, well, the boss was another guy named Wolfgang Droege, but he was really the hidden boss. He was the individual that provided the funding. He was the individual that basically turned the Heritage Front from, in the early days of being sort of a political organization, over into violence in the streets. Because the violence that had happened in Toronto didn't happen until later, and that was mostly because of what Grant Bristow did.
Are you a CSIS agent yourself?
No.
Have you ever worked for the government?
No.
Now I'm just going to ask some more questions, because because you are the subject of a lot of controversy. We're going to get to the prosecution of you in a moment, but we just have to talk about you for a moment. Have you been convicted? Are you a criminal? Have you been convicted of a crime of any sort?
No, I've not been convicted of anything.
Have you been charged with anything?
And that's actually saying something, because the individual that filed the human rights complaint against me also went to the Toronto police. And
talking about Richard Warman.
Richard Warman, and also tried to have me charged criminally. They reviewed everything I've said, and they didn't even bother to contact me. That's how little evidence there was.
Now, I want to. I looked at the case against you. It's called Warman versus Lemire. I mispronounced your name earlier. And one of the things that we had a hearing about, that you, first of all, let's go back a bit. Before I'm going to read some of the stuff that you were charged with before. I guess tell us the story. How did you come to be dragged before the Canadian Human Rights Commission?
In 2003, I had, as I mentioned earlier, I had an internet message board where people could go and post comments, and there were discussions about immigration, freedom of speech, other issues that are interested to Canadians. Richard Warman had been hanging around my message board for upwards of a year.
And was this when he was a staffer at the Canadian Human Rights Commission?
Yeah, I believe he was employed by the Human Rights Commission at that point. And he found some messages that he objected to, filed a Section 13 complaint against me, and I was notified of the Section 13 complaint in November of 2003.
So an employee of the Human Rights Commission filed a complaint at the Human Rights Commission in his own name, is that accurate?
Yep.
And what were some of the, did you write the material, the words he objected to, did you write any of them?
Not a single word of any of the complaint of material was anything I wrote.
So you were just the webmaster of these websites, and he complained about it. What did you do?
As soon as I received the complaint, which probably would be very early 2004, I took down anything that was there, and I attempted to try to mediate the complaint. The Human Rights Act is a remedial piece of legislation that is supposed to be able to mediate everything. So we went, I retained a lawyer, and we went to the Human Rights Commission and said, sure, all the material's down, let's mediate the case.
And obviously,
he had no interest in mediation. There was no mediation.
We're talking with Marc Lemire, the first person to beat the rap of a hate speech complaint before the Canadian Human Rights Commission. After the break, I'm going to read one of the poems that we had a 7-year prosecution for on TV. Will I be prosecuted? We'll find out. Don't go away. This is important TV.